everyone. My name is Heather Day. I'm the Director of Community Alliance for Global Justice, and on behalf of CAGJ and our AgriWatch campaign, I want to welcome you here tonight. I want to share with you a land acknowledgement created by Clear Sky Native Youth Council in collaboration with Town Hall Seattle. We acknowledge that we are in the homeland of Chief Seattle's people of the inside, the Duwamish tribe of Indians, the first people of this land. The Duwamish are the first Indian tribe named in the 1855 Point Elliott Treaty's title. On January 22nd, 1855, Chief Seattle was the first signatory to the Point Elliott Treaty at Mukilteo. 3 other chiefs signed the Point Elliott Treaty on behalf of the Duwamish tribe. The Duwamish homeland extends from Lake Sammamish west to Elliott Bay, and from Mukilteo south to Federal Way, a total of 54,700 acres. The Snoqualmie, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot tribes are also sovereign nations indigenous to Puget Sound. Many people living at these sovereign nations and elsewhere are descendants of the Duwamish tribe and have ancestral ties to this land. CAGJ acknowledges that the Coast Salish people are the salmon people, the stewards of the land, and the sacred waters in and around the Salish Sea. Tonight, we're proud to present the first public screening of our short film series, Rich Appetites: How Big Philanthropy is Shaping the Future of Food in Africa. Put a ton of time and love and effort into these films because we believe the story about the Gates Foundation's role needs to be told, and we're so excited to be able to share this story with you tonight. Despite spending over $1 billion on agricultural development over the past decade and a half, the Gates Foundation has failed to end hunger in Africa, nor has it supported small-scale farmers in any meaningful way. In fact, things have actually gotten worse. And yet, its technology-driven and corporate-friendly approach to agricultural development rarely gets pushed back in the US media, and Bill Gates remains widely seen as a friendly uncle figure who likes to tell us what books to read. The foundation has one of the largest endowments of any private philanthropy in history, yet its decisions about how it spends its vast wealth are too often celebrated and too rarely questioned. We created Rich Appetites to provide accessible media to inform the public and also Western journalists who need to be covering this story more, about how billionaire philanthropists are pushing US-style industrial agriculture around the globe, including in Africa, despite the fact that industrial agriculture is the single largest cause of biodiversity loss worldwide, fails to solve hunger, and hurts small-scale farmers and the planet. We want to gratefully acknowledge Greenhouse Studios, the South African animation studio, who were a delight to work with on the films. We're so grateful we were able to collaborate with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, and special thanks to Kirubel Tadele, who's with us tonight, for your always thoughtful and insightful contributions during the film's production. AFSA's involvement meant we were able to include many of the most prominent voices of the African food sovereignty movement in the films. And when the spark for this project was lit, we had the perfect person to produce them, working with us again for the first time in over a decade, since she co-founded the AgriWatch campaign as an undergraduate, and that is Ashley Fent. CAGJ founded our AgriWatch campaign to organize in solidarity with the African food sovereignty movement, which opposed the Gates Foundation's launch of a so-called new green revolution in Africa under the leadership of AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. CAGJ was founded in Seattle in the aftermath of the 1999 World Trade Organization protests in order to continue mobilizing opposition to neoliberal policies, both locally and across borders. The Gates Foundation's approach is fundamentally neoliberal, prioritizing corporate power over grassroots communities and self-determination. When we founded this campaign, it was to say no to the Gates Foundation in their own backyard, while also building relationships with the African organizations, leading the call for a different approach to ending hunger and building resilience in the face of climate chaos. Today, we sometimes see the devastating results of the Gates Foundation's programs covered by Africa's media outlets. However, not enough is known or understood in the rest of the world about the impact of the Gates Foundation's unchecked power in the realms of food systems and agriculture. So we hope these films will help shed light and grow a more critical consciousness, not just of the Gates Foundation's role in Africa, but also of the problems generally with billionaires and billionaire philanthropy and philanthrocapitalism. And the story is not only about the danger of the foundation's approach and the failures, it's also about the resilience of African small-scale farmers and producers and the hope that the food sovereignty movement and agroecology represent for all of us and the planet. In addition to the films, we invite our audience to dive into all the accompanying materials we've produced. We have annotated scripts, additional interviews, and we're really proud of these in-depth companion guides for each of the films that are available here tonight. You can pick them all up at our table, but also on the film's website. So we're really, truly grateful that you're all here with us tonight. And after the film, I'll introduce our speakers, but for now, enjoy the film, or the films, I should say. Fent, as I've mentioned, she co-founded CHJ's AgroWatch campaign while still an undergraduate at University of Washington. She is the producer of the films and will facilitate the discussion tonight. She has 10 years plus experience as a social environmental researcher, writer, and multimedia content producer, and she holds a Ph.D. in geography from UCLA. Yay, geographers. Kirubel Tadele is a communications officer with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA, and was a key partner in the production of Rich Appetites. Kirubel is an avid Pan-Africanist who is passionate about environmental, social justice, and human rights activism. He has over 10 years of experience in environmental advocacy and communications in both Ethiopian and international NGOs. Finally, Derrick McDonald is a design strategist and land steward at Black Star Farmers, a community farm that operates on a mutual aid model and fights for food sovereignty here in Seattle. A segment of their brilliant and passionate keynote speech, as you just saw, was featured in the film, and that speech was given at our annual gala called the SLE Gala last summer. So just a huge thank you to our speakers, and do want to note that you perhaps saw that Daniel Mayindi was coming tonight, a Kenyan scientist and close friend of AgroWatch, and unfortunately wasn't able to get his visa. But you will have a chance hopefully to hear from him in the next few months. But we are very grateful to our speakers here tonight, and we'll have a Q&A coming up after some initial responses. Enjoy.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Heather. So thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to be able to share the films with you. I'm going to be mostly moderating the discussion, so I'd like to turn it over now to Kirubel and Derrick to just share some reactions and commentary on the films. So, Kirubel, can we hear from you first?
Okay, thank you. First, I really would like to thank Community Alliance for Global Justice and AgroWatch for making this film a reality and for amplifying African voices. To be honest, most of the common cliche is, thank you for being the voice for the voiceless. But I always say, African farmers, smallholder farmers, has always had a voice, but their voice is silenced. Nobody asks them what kind of agriculture system they want, what kind of food systems they want. So thank you so much for being this voice and for amplifying the voice of African smallholder farmers. And on behalf of AFSA and the members, I would also like to really thank you for the invitation and for the warm reception I've been receiving. Obviously, I was just telling to Phil, it's very difficult to follow up after this emotionally and intellectually gripping film and to pinpoint some of the points, but I would rather probably say a few words about AFSA, for those of you who don't know more about AFSA. Then I'll try to, explain maybe some of where we are in terms of the advocacy that we are doing on Agra, and maybe a few 2-3 points to finalize. So cut me off whenever you're free to do that. So AFSA is a broader alliance in Africa, comprised of civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, farmers organizations, pastoralists, women group, and youth group. is one of the largest, civil society network in Africa. We have a reach of almost over 200 million African smallholder farmers. So as AFSA, as a secretariat, we speak on behalf of those constituencies. AFSA by itself is established as an antithesis for the happening of Agra in Africa in 2006. The whole idea of coming together was incepted around 2008, and we finally become a legal entity in Africa. Our headquarters is based in Kampala, but we work we have 41 members, spanning around over 50 African countries. So it's the biggest network of networks in Africa. Our work is to push for agroecology and food sovereignty agenda in Africa, to push for the transition towards agroecology, for addressing many of the challenges that Africa is facing, including food systems crisis, the climate crisis, the social justice crisis that's happening in Africa. Maybe one or 2 points where we are in terms of our advocacy with AGRA. In 2020, with the help of Staff's University and a group of German NGO organizations and a couple of African civil society organizations from AGRA operating countries, we did a research, and the research outcome was published entitled False Promises, the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. That publication basically essentially helped as a foundation to make the narratives and some of the facts that we have seen on this film. And the major outcome was, AGRA completely, totally failed on its own promises. When they first established, they promised to, halve the poverty, the food security crisis in Africa by reaching out 30 million African smallholder farmers by 2020, but none of the promises were kept. So in 2021, again with the help of international and African civil society organizations, we wrote a letter, a formal letter asking AGRA donors, including the Rockefeller Foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, and European governments and USA in America, calling them to stop funding AGRA. Basically, to challenge AGRA, to show them the kind of evidences to keep them giving their money. But as you can imagine, the response has been a deafening silence. We haven't been receiving any responses. And the irony, and it's really funny what's developing in Agra now. End of 2022, they changed the African Green Revolution Forum to African Food Systems Forum, and they said we're no longer the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, but we are just AGRA. So they just dropped the Green Revolution thing without changing the acronym, and they're just saying we're just AGRA. So those are the developments that's happening. We'll keep pushing on our advocacies, and we're not alone on this struggle. The CAGJ, the AGRA Watch have been really amplifying our voices and asking the American people, to be able to ask, this is taxpayers' money, where is our money going, and what the kind of agriculture that they're supporting, because obviously the kind of agriculture that AGRA is promoting is a green revolution, which is really failed. Smallholder farmers in Africa, it destroyed their environment, they make them more dependent on debt crisis, and eroding their diversity. That's the main thing that's happening in Africa today. So I'll be willing to expand more on questions and answers. Probably it's better to stop here. I'm sure I took a lot of time.
Thank you, Kirubel. Derrick, we'd love to hear a little bit maybe about Blackstone farmers as well, and some of the connections between the work that you're doing and the films and some of the issues there.
Awesome, thank you. I'd first like to thank CAGJ, Heather, and Deb, the committee organizers that made this event possible. I also want to thank Ashley as a producer on this film for making this knowledge accessible, and Kirubel, and all of the other people who've been involved in representing African perspectives on agriculture and making this knowledge really accessible to us. This film feels really important to me because African farmers don't need white colonialists to tell them how to farm. And it really, I think, is helping other folks to understand that. And just sort of the audacity of white capitalists and the power that they exert is astounding, and I really appreciate how so much of the information and data can be made accessible. Black Star Farmers is a community-led organization here in Seattle that emerged out of the George Floyd uprising in June of 2020 with the institution of the Black Lives Memorial Garden and Cal Anderson. We now steward 4 sites throughout Seattle and focus on food production and food distribution to communities who wouldn't normally have access to local, sustainable, and fresh produce. I think that this is valuable because, and I think relevant in a small way in the context of this conversation in these films, because it assists us in thinking globally but acting locally. And I think that if I really wanted to drive home some points, it would be about what we can do here now. And I think that the most important point is to build connections in your community, first and foremost. Those connections in your community should be with the land, valuable relationships with the land and the food that we put in our bodies. And the way that we build those valuable relationships with the land is by building reliable relationships with our community so that we can share the burden of, and the benefits, the bounty of cultivating those relationships with the land. These foods should be treated as friends. When you have a friend, you understand what their needs are, you understand how to see them, how to support them. And in order to do that, you have to put time and effort into cultivating strong relationships. So first and foremost, I think building strong relationships is what I would call on everyone who is interested in supporting efforts like this and siphoning power away from industrial agriculture and other capitalist and settler colonial systems. And I think that leads us to our second point, and that is to conspire. There's nothing more powerful than our conspiracies, envisioning together, acting together, and enacting futures where we don't rely on our commodified relationships to our food or our housing, where we have authentic relationships with one another and are able to operate in solidarity with people that aren't unlike us. And I think this is the third point, but I think it's the most important, and that is centering Black and Indigenous experiences as you cultivate these changes in behavior, perhaps. Black and Indigenous communities, both in the United States and globally, have been engaged in these struggles for a really long time and have a lot of valuable knowledge and experience to share. I would also caution us not to engage in that process extractively. The point of building those relationships and learning those stories is not to extract them from these communities, but to conspire with them to build strong bonds and connections to their struggle and to be in struggle and solidarity with them. I think that's all I have to say now, but yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I really like how you put all of those points. Those are great takeaways and points to drive home. I'm wondering, Kirubel, can I ask you kind of what, if you were to hope that people come away from the films with one kind of key takeaway, what you think that would be?
Yeah, as AFSA, we always say it's always good to start with the right question. The industrial model has one question to answer, which is increasing yield. It's the most addicted to production kind of paradigm that they come up with as a solutions for Africa. But for us as AFSA, the question is really not only the increasing the productivity of the yield of one or two crops, but we want to know, what are the kind of food system that we want to build in Africa. Producing more is okay, but how are we going to produce it? Are we going to produce it in a manner that's not destroying the environment in an ecologically, environmentally friendly way? Are we producing food in a culturally appropriate way? Are we producing food in a manner that addresses the nutritional needs of the communities? Are we producing food in a manner where we make communities resilient for different multifaceted crises that are happening in the world? Are we really making them, empowering them to respond to this kind of unpredictabilities? Every time something happens in the world, the entire food systems are disrupted in Africa, putting millions of African smallholder farmers, pushing them into hunger. So I would say the most important question for AFSA is really asking the right questions to come up with the right answer. And agroecology, we believe, answers all aspects of the food systems that we want to build in Africa.
Thank you. And that just kind of reminds me of one of the things I think a lot of the interviewees talk about is how multifaceted food is. It's not just something that you eat because you have to. It's cultural. It's medicinal. There's so many other. It's political, right? There's so many other aspects to food and eating and growing food beyond just, as you said, yield, right? So thank you both for kind of sharing those comments. And we'd like to open it up now to audience questions. I am being blinded by these lights right now, so it's a little bit hard for me to see folks' hands, but if you have a question, please raise your hand and Heather will help me
Hi, Derrick. I'm wondering if you have a working relationship with Duwamish tribal leadership and membership, and perhaps also with Southeast Asian immigrant farmers or Latin American farm workers or local Ethiopian. I'm just wondering about if there's a local food network of the variety that you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Yes, those communities do exist, and I think it's important that we get involved in them. I think something important to know about right now is this sort of cyclical nature that capitalism has. There are many people that there are lots of urban agricultural efforts that are especially community and culturally based. And many of those efforts are under attack right now. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Nurturing Roots, which is a Black-led community garden program, but they're in the process of being evicted. BLMG, we've received notification from Seattle about their continued desire to relocate the farm or the garden at Cal Anderson. And it's interesting because those requests come with stipulations to sign memorandums of understanding, which we see as contemporary iterations of treaties. They are demanding that we report the level of food production and the communities that we're distributing to, which I think signals to us the sort of insidious nature of surveillance that the state is working to enact. And taking credit for Black and brown communities, the labor that's coming out of the work that we're doing. So there are many communities, and I think that's an interesting thing about Seattle is how massive it is. I could sit up here and list those out to you. I would encourage everyone to be in your communities. These aren't people that you have to conjure up with a spell. They're people who live, they're your neighbors. And depending on what part of Seattle you're living in, you can access them. I guess I'll just end by saying that there are also efforts to organize and network these communities outside of corporate and state infrastructure. these organizations are speaking with one another and organizing together and finding ways to counter-institutionalize our processes and our communities. Did that help answer your question? Okay.
Thanks for being here. I know that I'm wondering about the seeds that were confiscated as intellectual property, because further down in the film it said that there were more indigenous seeds, being reinstated. And I wish we could bust the people out of jail that had to go to jail for up to 10 years for distributing seeds that are like cultural knowledge. Because I don't think politics, really belongs in agriculture. I think culturally, it's important. I wonder why there's not any protests outside. I don't know if there are outside of the Gates Foundation against and bringing knowledge to the public, because when the people from Greenpeace rode their kayaks or whatever, then they said they're going to stop doing global warming, and then it turned out to be like a political front, like carbon drawdown is like a political front to just keep the fossil fuel industry in power longer. So it's like giving to Africa is kind of a political front for colonialization. So I just really wish that there were more protests to force it to stop. And yeah, I'm wondering what happened, if there's a way to get the seeds back, or if they've been reintroduced.
Great. So I think there's kind of two questions there. One about what has happened to people that have been arrested or fined or jailed for kind of violating the intellectual property laws around seeds. And for that, I'll try to ask a question to Kirubel, and then I'll come back to the Gates Foundation.
Well, I'm also wondering about the seeds. Are they able to get their seeds?
Oh, are they able to get their seeds back?
Yeah. One of the saddest things that's happening to African food systems is we're fast losing our indigenous seeds. Okay, there's many factors to it, but one of the major driving factors is industrial agriculture in Africa. And like we have seen in the movie, one of the biggest success of Agra, based on our analysis, what they say, is they were able to change policies and laws in Africa. So that is not really helping for the revival of African seeds, traditional seeds, to continue doing that one, because what they are promoting is modern seed, hybrid seeds, and GMOs in Africa. And whoever is really promoting the indigenous seeds is considered to be a criminal act. If I share you a personal story that I've encountered in Ethiopia that always bothers me is when a wing of the AGRA was established in Ethiopia around 2010. The institution is called the Ethiopia Agricultural Transformation Agency. They call it ATA. So when they first established the office, I was representing a civil society, and we went to that office. They were still organizing the office, hiring some new people. So the woman who was in charge of to promote seeds in Agra was hired from America, from Seattle. The advertisement came from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Monsanto. Every advertisement was sent to them. She's originally Ethiopian, but she was born and raised in America. She has only half descendants of Ethiopian. So I asked her, what are you planning to do on seeds? And she was explaining to me how they want to formalize this seed sector. And I was asking her, what about the informal seed sector, which is representing 80% of Ethiopian, smallholder farmers? And she was like, what is the informal seed sector? I was blown up, to be honest. These are the kind of people they hire to change, the food systems in that country. So it shows you how grave the situations are.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of to speak to your question also about that's how most of the seeds are traded, is through the informal seed sector, or exchanged, right? Not even traded necessarily, but shared. And that's the target, is to commodify and commercialize all of those, and make it illegal and impossible for people to just share their existing seeds and develop their existing seeds outside of market economies. And the question about the Gates Foundation, I just want to note that that's one of the things that we as AgriWatch and CADJ have really tried to do, and that's kind of been central to the AgriWatch campaign, is like we need to bring this to the Gates Foundation's doorstep and make this very visible to people in Seattle, that this is happening kind of, in our backyard. And so we have had some protests at the Gates Foundation. In the past couple years, there was one that we did that was like a kind of public theater piece. That was in 2021. And then we did one last fall around kind of time to be with the Conference of Parties for the climate change, kind of literally shining the light on what the Gates Foundation is doing through light projections. So we definitely do try to keep the pressure on locally and bring it to the Gates Foundation's doorstep. Of course, they're still continuing to do exactly what they've been doing, but definitely invite all of you to join us in those future actions. So I see a few questions.
Hi, thanks. So AGRA is working with a lot of resources to essentially open Africa for business and allow the penetration and absorption of African food systems and culture into the corporate colonized profiteering system. Anyway, I'm just thinking about the United States because that system just predominates here and has penetrated so deeply into the food systems and society here. Is agroecology something that we can talk about in the United States context, or could it work here?
So maybe, Derrick, do you mind taking a first shot at that question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, it is happening. I also think that it's happening in spite of deeply entrenched systems of carceral systems and carceral logics. Going back to Nurturing Roots and their eviction from this garden space, that this concept of value extraction and ownership over property is enabling Black and brown communities to further lose access to their food systems and this reestablishment of foodways. I also think that in order for agroecology to work, we need to change our behaviors, and in order to change our behaviors, we have to change our conditions. This means that we need to change our relationship to food, and by that I mean reestablish relationships with food, because I think this idea that you go to a market or that you go to a supermarket and or a co-op even is insufficient. I also think that when we really start, and I don't want to take a lot of time here, but when we really start getting to this, what we're going to uncover is that our relationship to labor, our relationship to housing, all of these systems are deeply interconnected and preventing us from having authentic relationships with the land and having the opportunity to learn and understand how to nourish and care for it so that it can care for us, and also prohibits us from caring for each other. So we need to develop systemic solutions to systemic problems, and that requires changing lots of things. And I think that I don't have enough time to and also I am not the arbiter of this. This is stuff that you need to be doing at a kitchen table with your community, and figuring out what works for you. Kirubel, I'd love to hear if you have any insight into this.
It's particularly sharing the African experience. We don't say agroecology now. We always focus on the word transitioning, because there are many millions of African smallholder farmers who have already started using fertilizers, and we can assess them to stop using fertilizers tomorrow. But it's easier for African farmers to transition towards agroecology than big systems in America. Europe is trying to do that, but the whole notion of social movements are really becoming aware on food sovereignty issues and protecting the rights of the communities to know what kind of food is produced, who's producing it, and why, the business aspects of it. So we're seeing some hope, that's why we keep pushing, but there are a lot of organizations who are doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. My name is Vanessa. I'm Cameroonian, and I came here for an environmental restoration program called Earth Core. And so, in the course of my work, I'm having to discover food chemicals and whatever substances are being used having local names, for example. So the culture is being eroded, with the systems, with the science comes the culture also. So we have things like Roundup already becoming very local appellations of the products that they're using. We have relationships in the community being degraded. We have practices like wedding ceremonies being affected by the different, the foods that were being offered or exchanged between families are no longer there. So I'm wondering if this science that AFSA is using is being paired with the culture that comes with it, in order to transition back to this, to where we were before. It's the heritage that we're losing in addition to the food, and I'm just wondering if you have any stories, any testimonials of how it's happening on ground. And I guess my second question is also, with the politically difficult context that we have in the continent generally, but also in my country, we've been struggling with the civil crisis for more than 8 years now. And so you have people coming to take advantage of the brokenness of the system already. And so how are you able to navigate that and keep doing good despite this toxic context? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's as if you've been reading my mind, to be honest. And maybe Heather can add more, but she and myself was attending a food systems conference organized by AFSA in Cameroon last September. In Yaoundé, it's really, the coincidence is amazing. So one thing that we did on that food systems conference is launching My Food is African campaign. So that campaign is basically addressing your concern. Food is a highly political concept for AFSA. Food is some beyond, commodity for many of African cultures. We have a very diverse food systems. We have a very diverse foods in Africa, and the introduction of industrial agriculture is degrading that diversity. And the problem is across Africa. To be honest, we are fast losing our indigenous foods in the use. The new generation is, inclining more towards eating this fast food. Eateries that are being established, the McDonald's, the KFC, all the corporations are moving to Africa. So we are resisting to that kind of, food systems in that context. So the My Food is African campaign is already launched by 14, 16 African countries, and we have designed some activities to really target users and women and local markets to promote more indigenous African foods and connecting the youth to bridge the intergenerational learning from their fathers, from their grandfathers, who are still a farmer and who are still producing enough food for their communities using traditional seeds. So that's the core of AFSA's work.
Great. I think we maybe have time for one or two more questions.
My name is Kirubel Tadele. I'm originally from India, but I've been here in the US for a long time. My family is from a farming community, so my dad, grandfather, so we kind of understand a little bit of farming. So there's two questions. One question is that, is the reason Agra getting into Africa, is it because they're saying that, hey, Africa cannot feed for itself, so here we are, coming with these techno things, we're going to help you. Is that the reason, or is it that they see that, hey, there's lots of land in Africa, we can grow stuff there and export? So which of the reasons why Agra is incentivized to get into Africa? Right. That's my question. The second one is actually related. Are they saying that in Africa, if as a farmer you grow your own crop using your indigenous seed, are they saying that you go to jail? That sounds like too extreme. So anyway.
Thank you for those questions. Kirubel, would you like?
Maybe the first question, probably I would say both. But the Green Revolution, the story of Green Revolution started in Asia, as it was explained in the film properly. So the original Green Revolution happened in India, in Asian countries, and the Rockefeller Foundation was taking some lessons from Asia, and they want to implement it in Africa, for Africa to be able to feed itself and be able to feed the world. They say Africa has resources which can not only be able to use to feed its own people, but you have enough resources to feed the entire world. So that was the mentality, and most of Agra, the irony is, Agra is a US-based organization. They are registered in New York, I guess. And in their first board of Agra, the majority of were people from Europe and America. And it's only 3 or 4 African people who are even part of the entire process of, identifying the programs and planning the programs in AFSA. But recently, because of the push that, CIGG, Agra Watch, and the international movements are doing, some civil society organizations, including AFSA, are doing, they completely changed the membership to all African people. But still it's registered in US. So we always say it's a white man's vision is to feed Africa. The whole concept of New Green Revolution for Africa is, was orchestrated by one guy who was hired by Rockefeller Foundations to come up with a plan for Africa to be able to feed itself and feed the world. So I would say both. Some of the instances has happened, it's not a fiction. Some countries have ratified seed laws which criminalizes for farmers to use indigenous seeds and plant it. So basically those practice of sharing seeds informally is becoming very, very difficult. They cannot stop it because Africa essentially is based on informal seed sectors. But the fact that this kind of indications are there is mind-blowing, and that's what we're amplifying and struggling against.
I just wanted to build on that to give a sense of kind of what the mechanism is through which that happens. Like one of the examples that we kind of briefly showed in the film, and that we go into more detail on in one of the companion guides for the seeds one, is the South African plant breeding law. And a way that they define, so they basically make it illegal to sell seeds that are not commercialized, right? But the way that they define sell includes barter or sharing. So that's the mechanism. In some countries, the way, and it varies depending on different countries. Some have exemptions for like small scale farmers or for sharing. Some, like South Africa, define selling in a very, very restrictive way that makes it effectively illegal for people to exchange their seeds in any form. So, clarify that.
I was wondering why you're mostly touching on the US companies and not Indian, Chinese, and South African companies that are also quite involved in especially in southern part of Africa. If you go to Zambia, if you go to part of the meat industry actually in Botswana and in Namibia as well. There's a lot of influence coming from the south, and as well in Tanzania, coming from the Afrikaans farmer in South Africa, or the Indian farmers exporting palm seeds from Zambia to India. You didn't mention this at all. The whole movie is mostly about, I don't know if because you're based in Seattle, but it's mostly focusing on the Gates Foundation, but there's a lot of other corporates in there as well. Same thing with Europeans. You barely touch on European. You have large European companies investing in seed farming in Kenya and in Tanzania as well. And so you see that through. I will tell you about my experience. I cycle through Asia and Africa, and I've seen a lot of traditional farming in Ethiopia, Burundi, in Uganda, in Malawi. But the other countries I mentioned, I have seen large corporations coming in, and they were mostly Africans that have migrated from the south, or Indian companies coming in. So I don't understand why you don't mention those at all. Maybe they're just a small factor, but they definitely are. It's quite obvious when you cycle through those countries, especially in Zambia.
Would you like me to address that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, would you like to go first?
Okay, yeah. I mean, with all honesty, it's, addressing these industrial agriculture issues is a tip of an iceberg. You know, multitude of actors are happening in Africa pushing industrial agriculture with all packaged seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, you know, all the technological transfer things. So the major thing for us is it all started with the Rockefeller Foundations and AGRA coming to Africa and launching the New Revolution for Africa campaign, you know, establishing AGRA in Africa. That was the entrance, you know, for many of the corporations to start approaching Africa as a market to set their seeds, you know, work with African governments to change seed laws, you know, agricultural policies. But as a plan for AFSA, to be honest, this is not only our approach is AGRA might be, you know, small portion of the problem, to be honest. It's one problem, we know that, but it's becoming a larger issue. It's a lack of capacity to do all the research and do this kind of films to really amplify and, you know, dissemination the information. But we know the challenges here, and we are still trying to make research, try to understand it for ourselves first, then try to teach our small farmers to organize themselves.
Yeah, that's a great response and great context. And just to speak to kind of the framing of the film specifically, you're absolutely right that there are many different companies from different countries, many that are kind of transnational, so they're kind of operating across those country borders, that are increasingly interested in and invested in African agriculture. The story that we were trying to tell really is about how a very large, wealthy, powerful foundation claiming to do humanitarian work, the Gates Foundation, is facilitating those corporations that are American corporations, but also that are German corporations and Indian corporations, Chinese corporations, right, like ChemChina, facilitating their entry into and kind of ability to profit from African agriculture. So you're absolutely right that there's, you know, that could easily be like a film for each of those companies and the kinds of things that they're doing. But we were really trying to make the case that the Gates Foundation it's one actor, right? It's, you know, an AGRA is one institution that's doing this in a sea of other actors that are doing a similar thing, but it's an extremely powerful one. And just to give a sense of like what that means, right? The Gates Foundation, up until like last year, was the only representative of kind of philanthropy in the Committee for World Food Security in the FAO. So it had and has kind of an outsized influence and power over shaping that, what's happening in African agriculture, but also what's happening globally, and the kinds of recommendations that are being developed, the kinds of visions of agriculture that are being put forth. So that's the reason that we focus primarily on kind of the role of the Gates Foundation, and that they're doing this saying that they're like helping, right? And just kind of trying to expose that that's actually not what's happening. I hope that addressed your question. So we have time for one more question.
Yeah, this becomes a question. What is happening in Africa? What was happening quite recently in India? It's been happening in Peru with potatoes, Monsanto. It's been happening in the U.S. I've been reading agricultural magazines of all sorts for over 60 years now. And you don't very often see in the agricultural magazines reports of the really rather draconian things that are happening in the U.S. with particularly corn farmers in the Midwest who are trying to not grow GMO corn. What you do see is the really wonderful shiny ads for the latest thing. And I think basically you're 20 years too late. And I think what you need to do is figure out how to make large capitalism stop happening. Because, the same thing is happening in agriculture that's happening in practically every other field of endeavor. Bigness is financially wonderful, but bigness is not greatness. And if you figure out how to do that, I would say call it intellectual property, patent it, and then start throwing those bandits off the ship in Boston Harbor. That's what you need is a tea party. Possibly several.
Thank you. Would either one of you like to respond?
No, it's just acknowledging the bigger picture of the problem, to be honest. We all share that. We know the problem is systemic. And the challenge is enormous. It's very complex. And that's where they are missing. For the enormity of the problem, the complexity of the problem, the solution that they suggest is promoting 2 or 3 crops or, feeding. So we were saying it's more becoming clear that the challenge we are facing is very systemic challenge, and how to address is to make people aware that organize, so that we have the capacity to resist and make our voice heard, and eventually try to make decisions that would facilitate our way of thinking, our way of paradigm to spread around Africa.
Yeah, sure. The power of capital is that all of our social relations are reduced to a wage relation, right? It completely corrupts the real power and spirit that binds all of us to each other and to the land. I don't think that there's anything more human than eating. As humans, that's something that we all do. And when we have a human problem, technology is not going to solve that. We don't need technological solutions to human problems. We need human solutions to human problems. I would love to see the future that you're dreaming of. I'm dreaming of it too. So thank you for bringing that into the space.
Yeah, indeed. I also kind of want to touch on a common question that comes up for us around, like, well, what should the Gates Foundation do instead? And I think this is one of the things that comes up with the film, and I think in the short term, like, fund agroecology, right? And in the long term, billionaire shouldn't exist, right? Because of all the reasons that you're saying, right? And because of like the way that people have been able to get this wealthy is through the exploitation of labor, through seizure of land from indigenous peoples, right? And so, you know, that's really kind of the subtext of, you know, what we're trying to do with the films and what we're trying to do in our work is, you know, the foundation really shouldn't exist as such, right? And capitalism really shouldn't exist as such. With all that being said, I think we should probably wrap up. Thank you to both of you for joining me.
So, we just, the lights are dimming so that we can share some slides. But yeah, just as wrap up, first, let's give another round of applause. Thank you, Kirubel, for coming all the way here from Dallas. Really, really appreciate it. It's so special to have you here. And we are, again, just super proud. It's fine if you want to leave the stage. I mean, either way, it's fine if you're comfortable. But yeah, just want to make sure you're all aware of these amazing resources that also, for the most part, Ashley wrote. We did have assistance from others. But these companion guides, the films are incredible, and they're all follow an outline of myths that are debunked by each one. So these are an example of a few of the myths, but well, the first 4 are doing that work. It just all, you know, scientifically based, all sourced, and they're just incredible. And then the last one, Agroecology in Action, features each of the producers that presented in the films and just gives bios of themselves and the organizations. So these are great resources. They're available. You're all available. You're all welcome to take them home with you, but also just help promote them and know that they're on our film website as well. And in addition to the event tonight, we're also having a virtual launch of the films, which I think is the next slide. So our next event is Wednesday, April 12th. We'll be showing the films online and then have a discussion with 2 of the people that are featured in the films, Mariam Mai and Mamadou Goita. And then we're planning a meeting with the Seed Working Group of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. They'll be giving a report back to us. An event coming up, and one of the co-chairs is Frances Davies of the Zambia Alliance for Agroecology and Biodiversity, so she'll also be part of that panel on April 12th. And then in terms of our other work, CHJ also does work in solidarity with local partners. If you want to go to the next slide. We're also incorporating our work with our African partners, but we're doing an art and activism speaker series right now. Just had fantastic webinars with David Solnit in February, and then our farm worker partners, community to community at Familias Unidas, just earlier this week. And then on April 18th, with wonderful artist, activist Beverly Natus, who I know is friends with many of you, will be presenting, and we'll have another speaker in May. And then these are leading into art making workshops, just centering the importance of community gathering again and doing cultural work together. Both for CHJ but also for our partners. So the April 22nd workshop will be making banners and signs for the May Day March with our farm workers partners in Skagit Valley, which is happening Sunday, April 30th. We'll organize carpools, so that please come with us. And then our silk screening and poetry workshop with David, who's coming on our invitation from California for that workshop, will be creating signs and probably paper mache, and I'm not sure what else, but for our work in solidarity with Northwest Tribes to oppose GE salmon. So that's a couple of the events coming up I wanted to invite you to. And otherwise, I just want to say a final thank you again to Ashley and Derrick and Kirubel, also to Theo Calhoun, who is assisting us tonight with all things, with recording this event so that it'll be available on our YouTube channel soon, but also is helping us get into film festivals. We've gone into our first one with geographers, and hope to get into many more. And finally, I want to thank Town Hall Seattle for hosting us and all of you for coming. Thank you so much.